Hello, Christopher Brent here, coming to you today with a musical podcast on the subject of pedaling in piano. So this one is going to be geared towards pianists and piano enthusiasts and those who just want to learn a little bit more about what the pedal does on the piano and how you will apply it in context when performing music. Okay, so let's talk pedal. This is a very important subject. Believe it or not, pedaling is extremely important. So it's not going to be applied the same way in every piece depending on the era that you are in as far as the composition is concerned. So you're not going to treat the pedal the same way in 20th century music as you would in Baroque or classical period music. So that's why it's so important to know about the situations that you will encounter in each one of the periods, the Baroque period, classical, romantic, and 20th century. And if you want to call Impressionism a separate period, then that's fine too. Actually, the pedal is a huge part of the Impressionist literature when we're looking at Debussy and Ravel and other French composers. So what do you do? How do you use the pedal? So most of the time when we're playing the piano, probably 90%, 95% of the time, the pedal that we're going to be using is the one on the far right, which is the damper pedal. So when you push that pedal down, all of the dampers come off the strings, and every note that you play will sustain until you release the pedal, and then the dampers go back down on the strings, and the sound decays at that point. So pedaling is very important. Why? Because if you don't use it correctly, you can end up blurring harmonies together and it can sound disastrous in many circumstances. So I've heard many performances where students were playing with correct technique and everything was flowing with continuity and it was beautiful and everything, but the student was leaving the foot down all the time through all of these harmonies and they were clashing together, so therefore we didn't get the right kind of sound, right? So traditionally, what happens, and I think this is going to be the case most of the time, just as a generality in the piano, when you're playing, whenever the chord changes, often in the left hand, that's when you lift the pedal up and you're going to put it back down again. So if you don't do that, you'll have two clashing harmonies sounding together, and that doesn't work most of the time, at least. So if you are going from a C chord to an F chord to a G chord and back to a C chord, like a 1, 4, 5 change, each time the harmonic block changes, you want to release the pedal and put it back down. And you have to do it rhythmically, and that's where the challenge can be. So if you don't do that, you're going to blur all those chords together and it won't sound so good. So this is where having a private teacher can come in handy. This is very hard to learn through a tutorial, although I suppose, there have been teachers who've offered pedaling tutorials out there, and some of them may be good. But it does help to have a teacher handy to show you how to properly lift the foot and put it back down when the harmony changes. It is a rhythmic thing. You have to lift the foot and put it back down often on beat 1. And you can't lift early or late, but oftentimes I find that students are lifting their foot way too early, and that doesn't sound so good either. So work with a private teacher that can help you understand this, and there's several exercises that can be done to improve this, but often on beat 1 or beat 3, whenever the harmony is typically changing in a very common piece of music, I suppose. In a hymn, for instance, a church hymn, you're going to find the harmony changing on beat 1 and maybe beat 3. Sometimes it's each quarter note it might change. There might be a chord changing on every beat. So you will have to lift the pedal on every beat and put it back down, and sometimes you got to move the foot quickly, right? So what do you do in more complex situations, like when you're playing a Mozart sonata, for instance, where we never see a pedal indication by Mozart? There's some, but not many, right? Or what do you do with Bach, right? When Bach was not writing on the modern piano, how do we do this, right? How do we deal with the pedal? There are some purists who might not use any pedal for Baroque music on the piano. I think you can use a little bit of pedal, excuse me, as a general thing. So So you can use half pedals. This is where it gets a little more complex, and this is typically going to be more for an advanced student. So again, you would want a private teacher to help you through this. So you want little dabs of pedal here and there where you feel it is appropriate, generally speaking in Baroque and classical music. Using quarter pedals and half pedals, that's going to be more applicable too. So what is a half pedal? It basically means you put your foot on the damper pedal and you go down only about halfway instead of the whole way, so you get a little less sustain out of it, which is probably what would have happened on Mozart's pianos or Haydn in Beethoven and maybe Chopin. The sustain that they had on those instruments was not like it is on the modern Steinway. So if you want to get a more authentic sound and a crispier sound without too much blurring, you might use this quarter pedal or half pedal technique. And you can break it down even more and try to just barely put the foot down about a tenth of the way. You can really break it down and just barely touch the pedal and get just the tiniest bit of sustain, and it works really well in these Baroque and classical contexts. When you're in the Romantic period, generally you're playing maybe more chords or octaves or things like that, and you can leave the foot down through those passages because sometimes they're highlighting one particular harmony and playing through the passage. The pianist is playing through the passage with just one harmonic block. It sounds like it's this big complicated thing, but often it's not. So you can leave the pedal down through those lines. You got to be careful often, as a general rule, with chromatic scales. This kind of goes through all periods, really. If you have a chromatic scale, if you're going C to C sharp, D, D sharp, E, if you're going through a chromatic line, you don't want to leave the pedal down through the chromatic lines unless the composer wants some specific effect to blur on purpose, but that's pretty rare. So you have to be careful with chromatic lines and pedaling. That's very important. So a couple just general things to recap here. When the harmony changes, when the chord changes, you want to be lifting the pedal, putting it back down. And when you're in the Baroque and classical period, you want generally less pedal, sometimes way less pedal, often lighter and just little spurts with half pedalings here and there, and you have to use your ear to find those spots. And then, of course, when you have chromatic scales, you're going to want to basically either not pedal through those lines or be very, very careful with it. That's the best way I can put it. So chromatic scales or pedaling through chromatic lines can often result in a harmonic blur, and it's not so good. When it comes to Debussy and French music, pedaling is very, very important because oftentimes there's whole tone scales or pentatonic scales kind of whistling up and down the piano, and you can pedal through those, and it's a beautiful effect, but you have to be careful not to overdo it. And there's several layers that you have to deal with in French music of the early 20th century, and you need to do that with your fingers more than the pedal. And that's the other thing, too. When it comes to pedaling, sometimes students will rely on the pedal too much. Can't do that. You want to get a good legato through your fingers, not from the pedal. There's a few little tricks and some cheating you can do here and there with pedal to get a legato effect, especially if you have a small hand, to get a connection that you can't get with the fingers. You can kind of cheat with the pedal. A private teacher would help you with that. But get the legato line with the fingers first and add pedal afterwards. I probably should have said that at the beginning of the podcast. So learn the line, learn the legato with the fingers first, and add pedal second. Don't just put the foot down right away. I've had a lot of students who want to pedal right away and they don't have the legato line down in the fingers. So do that first. That's very, very important. And look for the pedal indications if the composer has them. Oftentimes in Romantic and 20th century music, we see more pedal indications than in classical period music or Baroque period. We really don't see any pedal indications. So this is an important subject, and I would definitely advise to find a teacher that can help you look at all the details in all of the music that you're dealing with. And this is certainly something that's important for playing jazz and rock music too. The same rules apply about harmonic changes and things like that. And you can have a lot of good things going on, but if your foot is not operating the way it should on the pedal, then you can end up blurring too many harmonies together, and it can be a rough patch of sound coming out of the piano. So so be careful. The pedal on the left is the soft pedal. That basically just helps you get a very quiet sound, which is useful for accompanying other musicians if you want to get a very soft sound. And of course, the composer can indicate it with an una corda indication, which means the hammer will be hitting one string instead of the three strings like it normally would. So you're going to get a quieter sound. They call that the una corda pedal, or the soft pedal. We often just call it that. The middle pedal, which is on most pianos that you see, except very old pianos before the turn of the century maybe, where they did not have this pedal. The middle pedal is called the sostenuto pedal. The sostenuto pedal helps you get sustain on maybe a low bass note, while you don't have sustain on the higher notes while that lower bass note is ringing. So you have to play that low bass note, catch it in the middle pedal, the sostenuto pedal, and you'll hear that low note ring, and you won't get that sustain out of the higher notes that you play while that low note is ringing, if that makes sense. We don't usually use the sostenuto pedal all that much. It's very rare that we do in piano music, but it does happen specifically in impressionistic or 20th century music. Sometimes in romantic music you can apply it in various ways, but it's mostly going to be geared towards 20th century and 21st century music. So most of the time, like I was saying, you're going to be using the damper pedal or the sustain pedal, which is going to be the pedal on the right. So it is something that you are going to have to do as a pianist. We have our hands, fingers, and the foot that we got to use. And sometimes we're using both feet if we're using the soft pedal, because we're using the soft pedal with our left foot, and we're using the damper pedal, of course, with the right foot. If you have any questions, please email me at chrisbrentmusic@gmail.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, and visit my website at www.christopherbrent.com. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.